A diverse and inclusive workplace culture is a widely accepted ideal. In fact, 77%, more than three-quarters of procurement professionals, say a diverse and inclusive workplace is important to their organization. Furthermore, 80%, that's four out of five, say their organization is proactive in making an impact on equality, diversity, and inclusion. So the obvious question is how? And that's what we will be exploring in this edition of Global Sourcing Insights from SIPS. I'm Bob Rossback, and joining me are three panelists who have quite a bit of expertise in this area. First is Alessandra Alex Tassini-Negri, Head of Global Strategic Sourcing, Procurement, and Vendor Management, Dun & Bradstreet. Welcome, Alex. How are you?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited about this topic today.
Excellent. So the 77% support for ED&I principles was a result of our annual SIPS Hayes Procurement Salary Survey. So we are also joined by two representatives from Hayes who can add their industry-wide and global perspectives. First is Louisa Benedicto, Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, Corporate Social Responsibility, and Sustainability at Hayes. Welcome, Louisa. Glad you could join us.
Hi, Bob. Great to see you all. Thanks for having us.
Excellent. And Scott Dance, Procurement Engagement Director, also at Hayes. Scott, I noticed that your title isn't as long as Louisa's, but I found that you still have plenty of good things to say, so it's great to have you back for another webinar.
Thanks, Bob. Great to see everybody. Looking forward to this topic, actually. It's a big passion of mine, so yeah.
Excellent. Louisa, can you set the stage for us? What does a workplace look like when it fully embraces equity, diversity, and inclusion?
Well, I could talk about this for a long time, but I won't because I know I've only got a certain amount of minutes. But I would say, if you could distill it down, it'd be a workplace that is diverse at all levels, where people feel included to, be themselves or show up as who they feel they are. And respected, and therefore, when you're respected, empowered to share your unique insights or your own perspective on business issues or workplace pieces that need to be worked through. You would see a leadership team that was in consultation with all the different people within the organization, not just their inner group, but all different groups within the organization, and we're able to embrace those different diverse perspectives to find solutions that work for their customers or for whoever it is that they're serving. And one of the letters that is now being added actually to the DE&I conversation is B, and B is for belonging. And I think it's important also to mention that belonging is a big part of the DEI journey. And belonging, I found a really nice definition a few years ago that I keep coming back to, which is belonging is being seen, being connected, being supported, and being proud. And I know that that's how I want to feel every day when I'm working at Hayes. So there you go. That's it in a nutshell. Does that work?
Yes, it does. So how does maybe this is a little bird walk here, but how would you distinguish between inclusion and belonging? Because isn't inclusion the same sort of thing? Is there what would you say is the difference between both initiatives?
So I'd say being included doesn't mean that you're also going to feel like you belong. So I could be invited to a party. So I'm included in that party, but maybe no one there really talks to me, or I'm not offered the really nice canapes that are being handed around. I'm just getting the dregs at the end, or, people are dancing, but it's not the kind of music that I would ever dance to. So that would be the difference between being included. I got the invite and I came, but I don't really feel like I belong here.
Okay, so it's really one step further. It's a deeper engagement.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. So, Scott, let's turn to you. 76% of the respondents in the salary survey say they struggle to find the right talent. So, if you are struggling to find the right talent, how does that strain ED&I recruiting goals? I mean, you're trying to get a diverse workforce, but on the other hand, you're just trying to, you have, it's hard to find any warm body. So, how does these two things, is there a conflict there, or am I just making that up?
No, no, you're not making it up, and it is a real challenge. I think we see across the globe at the moment. There's a real talent shortage. Across all different sectors and all different industries. You'll see that, in America, for example, that the unemployment levels for professionals is fairly low. So therefore, there aren't people freely on the market like there was, just a couple of years ago, whilst everyone wanted to leave after the pandemic, and there was a huge movement in the labour market. So you're right that there is a large challenge, which then is impacting not just the here and now, but also the succession planning. Because when we look at ED&I, it's not about ticking boxes right now. It's not about ticking boxes. It's about the longer term strategy for an organization to make sure they have a continued succession plan for the senior leaders, but also that they are talent pooling diverse talent, which actually has a huge impact on their business because of different thoughts and different ideas, which all different types of people will bring to the table. So I guess what is the challenge and how do you combat that? I guess we'll start talking about that in a bit more depth later on. But you're right. Whilst obviously 80% of organizations have said that they're kind of making a step change to be proactive, they're not necessarily getting the breadth and depth of candidates that they would like. So it is an ongoing battle, I suppose.
Excellent. So going back to Louisa, the salary survey has identified a lack of technical skills.
Mhm.
A lack of technical skills is a big factor in finding talent. So how should organizations address that? If they have strong internal training resources, does that help? Or what's the bullet here, the magic bullet?
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's a magic bullet, but certainly what I'm seeing is the solution is to start recruiting for potential rather than X amount of years of experience having done this job. And we know in our world, in the recruitment world, often a job description will come with that precursor, must have done this job for X amount of years. And we understand that. We understand, most of the time a customer or a client would like someone to walk in and be able to do the job right away. But the problem is, as Scott said, there is a massive skill shortage. Right now in the United States, and despite my accent, I work the US market, there are 9.5 million open jobs and 6.5 million unemployed people. So we have a deficit, and we have to start looking for candidates in non-traditional ways, whether that be bringing people back to the workforce that have exited. So during COVID, we saw a lot of people leave the workforce because of caring duties or changes in the way that their life works. Immigration, right? I also cover Canada. We have huge goals here around immigration and bringing 500,000 people into the country every year to try and deal with this skills deficit. But that still doesn't mean you're going to come with candidates that are ready and able to do the job because they've been doing it. So we have to start recruiting for potential. And when a customer does this, and we've seen this time and time again, when you hire for potential, when you hire someone who is, making a career change, not worked in this job before, fresh out of school, maybe any one of those, and you invest in that individual and you train them and you develop them, they stay longer, they're more engaged. Your retention, as I said, is much better. And then, as Scott said, you have your own succession plan going forward, right? So I think that is really the key. We've got to start hiring for potential, not have done the job for many years previously.
Excellent. So we still have a gender gap. The gap is trending down, but stubbornly it does exist. I think in the last survey, it was just above 4% as an overall average. So can you speak to that, Scott and Louisa? Scott, why don't you go first?
Yeah, there is still a gender pay gap issue, and sadly, that's across the globe as well as in America. And I think that comes from the thinking further forward than tomorrow or currently, because that's what a lot of organizations are short-sighted in the fact that they are not necessarily thinking about what does our organization need to look like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. We also, as Louisa alluded to, is job descriptions.
Mhm.
we still see a lot of job descriptions that are not inclusive in any way, shape, or form, and doesn't necessarily encourage the gender pay gap or females to apply for those certain jobs because of certain things around working hours. And we're still hell bent on this. You have to be in the office or you have to be online at a certain time, which actually doesn't often support the female population and others as well. So I think that, you know, to try and tackle that as a starting point, we need to look at the beginning of the process. So the advertisements, the job descriptions, and the way people go to market to encourage not just females to apply for roles, but also others as well. And then we need to look, once that people are in the organization, around the career planning, you know, and what does that look like, you know, as people get more senior in their career. Often females may go off and have children or take a career break or are carers for their family, and often organizations often put their career on hold, which shouldn't be happening, because we're in a new age now where actually working hours should be a thing of the past, and we should be more accommodating to make sure that actually we can have more female leaders, because of people can log off at 3 o'clock when they have to pick their children up, but they can log back on in the afternoon, and that doesn't matter, because ultimately it should be more about getting the job done and efficiently well. That doesn't mean being at your desk or online for 8 hours straight in a row.
Yeah, not for all careers, but certainly in this type of work, that absolutely. A couple of other things to add to that with the way that job descriptions are written. Statistically, we know that women will apply to jobs where they hit 100% of the requirements, whereas men are more likely to apply to a job where they have 60% of the requirements. So simple tweaks that you can make shorten your desired skills. You'll get more candidates apply, and you will certainly get more women apply. So we always say golden rule of 3, no more than 3 top skills, right? And the rest you can screen for as you're meeting with candidates. The other thing is pay transparency. So we've gone pay transparent in Hays Canada for across the board. And in many states in the US, pay transparency is law, and in the EU, it's on table and it's coming in. So, pay transparency is a huge point. Why? And why is that important for women? If you are hiring someone, traditionally what used to happen was you apply for a job, they ask you how much you're earning, and you get, a small increase, 5-10K, depending on what level you're at. So what that does is that perpetuates higher salaried people, right? And traditionally, we know that's been men, because that's the way the disparity has previously worked. It's changing, but that's how it has worked, right? So now what will happen is, or what is starting to happen in major markets, and I urge anyone on this call who works in a market that it isn't legislation to table this, and I'm happy to share resources with you to help you to do that internally, but start putting the salary on a job, and that will then weed out a candidate that's too expensive. And it will help candidates understand what is required of them in order to earn a certain amount of money. So pay transparency is a huge point to remove this inequity between men and women in the gender pay gap. I think those 2 points, in addition to everything Scott said, would really help.
Excellent. Okay, Alex. On this topic, you're a thoroughbred racehorse, and you have been pacing patiently in back in the stall here, ready to go into the starting line. So you embrace the ideals that Louisa and Scott have described. Tell us about your experience with the gender gap and how Dun & Bradstreet is trying to address it.
I would say that when you think about gender gap, right, I think what Louisa said makes perfect sense. You're looking at how do you actually remove any, how do you lend the visibility that's necessary for people to understand what they need in order to apply for a particular position. It's interesting because I agree with you 100%, Louisa, about the fact that even myself, when I was applying for certain positions, I was looking at the job description going, oh, well, I don't have that. Oh, well, I don't have that. And then I realized, and this is actually my husband who brought it to my attention, because at one point he took over my submissions and said, you're no longer applying to any jobs. I'm applying for you. This was early in my career. So because I know you and I know what you can do and what you can't. So he actually did apply for me, and I did get certain positions because he applied for me, even though I only had maybe 50%. That sounds hysterical, but
that's brilliant.
You know, part of this moment is it's finding your people, right? It's finding the people that are going to support you and making sure that they understand what you're capable of as well, and being an advocate for other people and sharing that experience so that they understand you don't have to meet 100% of what's on a job description, right? That's not the point. You can do something very effective as a leader. And this is something that I automatically do whenever I'm interviewing anybody or considering any candidates, right? Is looking at this from a gender gap, but from a diversity in general perspective. When somebody applies, I'm not looking to tick the boxes. I know what I have on my job description. I know what my top ones are. I know what my middle is, and I know what my less critical is. I'm looking to figure out who can potentially fill that for me and in which particular areas. And that's irregardless of the name, the culture, the experience, anything. The interview process itself for me just has to do with the person that I see on that page and the potential, which is what you mentioned a few moments ago. Because you're right, Scott, and to this point as well, it's hard to find the right people for the jobs, right? You have a situation right now where there's a shortage of people that know how to source, negotiate, contract, handle relationships, communicate effectively. But you can do something about that. You can be creative around those pieces and figure out exactly how to address what you're looking for at different levels by bringing in interns to really start building your pipeline, right? Taking a look at your current employees and figuring out what their trajectory is and then meeting them at what they need for that moment based on where they are in their career and their life. And also creating an ecosystem, which is very important as well, which will then bring the entire group together and they learn from each other. So it's not just about going out and buying training and developing people. It's about developing people and them developing each other and really creating that ecosystem of interdevelopment that happens. And then you create that pipeline to address what Scott was mentioning in terms of, I don't have the people or the skill sets are missing, right? But gender gap is really important. For me, I look at the salary and it makes no difference to me whether it's a male or a female or otherwise. The salary is the salary. Yeah. If I am hiring this person to do the job, they're going to get what that salary demands for that particular position. And I think I do agree with you as well. And I will share one of my experiences, Louisa, about having, you know, this open transparency on what exactly the range is on salary. That's extremely helpful for several reasons. Whether a person is applying for a job, looking for a job or not, you should know what your worth is.
Yeah. So we've talked about talent in the Caribbean, and I know Trinidad and Tobago has in their public procurement, they have a very strong transparency procedure. So everybody knows what everybody makes. I mean, it's just it's on the job description, it's on the application, it's on everything. So everybody knows. So if you're not getting what that you get what you get, you know. So that really certainly discourages gender gap kind of discrepancies. But I think Alex, you were saying kind of the same thing that Louisa and Scott were talking about, that you can't hire for the now, you have to hire for now and later. Is that what I'm getting?
It's a combined effort, right? You have to look at your entire organization, understand what the business needs, and then plan accordingly. And if that means that you have to bring in interns as a starting point, right, and hopefully convert those interns, you have to have a very strong culture, but you also have to have a framework of how the development is going to work internally amongst yourselves, as well as with exterior training and development modules. You know, SIP's a perfect example of that as well. But thinking about that holistically is really important. And I think, to Scott's point, I do want to highlight this, which I really love this piece. When you think about the people that stopped working during the pandemic, for one reason or another, and I think, Louisa, you touched on this as well, right? Bringing those people back, but also working with the folks that you have to retain your talent, and maybe they don't want to be full-time anymore. Maybe they want a part-time position. They want to do a shared position with someone else. You have to be creative. That's how you retain your talent. In addition, obviously, to the culture and being creative in terms of looking outside of the box, not just going to agencies, but also going to diverse organizations, right? Talking to your network, understanding what's out there, and branding yourself, huge. You have to be able to show everyone out there who you are as a leader, as an organization, and actually show people that your organization mirrors them. If you do that, you automatically get an influx of interest. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is not just about numbers. It's not just about a job description. It's about you being uniquely you and being able to put what you believe out there. It's your values. If you can express that in branding, if you can express that as a leader by what you do, the action you take, that speaks volumes to everyone out there. That will help mitigate it.
Great. So are there specific things you do in the hiring process that are helpful? Walk us through some of the things that you do. You talked about the interview, and it's not just you. You're not the only one who interviews.
No.
You have multiple people will interview a candidate, correct? But what are just walk us through some of the things that you think have been very helpful in recruiting the kind of talent that you think you need for now and the future.
So part of what I do, obviously, is I'm not looking at names, right? I mean, you have to be careful with bias. Whether it's unconscious or not, still bias. Everybody has it. Everybody has to admit that, right? So if you're not looking at the name, but rather you're just looking at the experience and you're thinking about your organization and planning accordingly, and then you bring that person into an interview, what you want to make sure to do is to showcase who they're going to be reporting to, number one, because that's important. The interview isn't just about you interviewing them. It's about them interviewing you and understanding what your organization is about and understanding how you feel about that. So during the interview process, I'm very, very transparent about where my organization sits, the fact that we're virtual, the fact that we are a very diverse organization, whether that's in thought process, culture, experience, or otherwise. We have various different facets of diversity. It's not just obviously my background. I'm Brazilian, by the way. But it's not just about that. It's about everything. It's your journey as an individual. And I bring that to the forefront so that they understand that that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for someone that's going to join my team and be part of this journey with me. I'm not just looking for somebody to come on and take a job.
Yeah. All right, Louisa, what is your experience? What are some things that you advise people to do in the hiring process?
I'd say before you start hiring, a lot of this is to do with how you're sourcing, right? And where you're sourcing. And if you're using just traditional methods of post job and, hope that I get a diverse set of candidates respond, then think of other ways that you can be publicizing your jobs, right? Some of the things that I always recommend are use your existing networks internally that might have, community relationships. So if you have employee resource groups or ERGs or PRGs, as is sometimes called, have you advertise your jobs through them and ask them to promote them within their networks. Alex mentioned interns. Interns is an excellent way to be connecting in with diverse talent, equity deserving groups. There's so many different ways that you can do this. Bring them in for paid internships, and then bring them back once they graduate, right? So that you have your own network of candidates. So I think sourcing is really important. Don't just put a standard DEI statement in your job advert, because people will tell quickly when they come in, oh, that was just, that was ChatGPT speaking, not the company. Like, actually use real examples of what you've done internally to promote the diversity, equity, and inclusion journey that you're on. Or be honest and say, we're early on, but here's our hopes and dreams for diversity, equity, and inclusion at our company. To Alex's point, when you're interviewing, make sure that panel is diverse. Women perform better in front of women. That's a proven fact. right? If a person who is from the Black community meets another person from the Black community, that brings to light the fact that their diversity, equity, and inclusion statement is actually true and not just lip service, right? So think about that from all areas of diversity. I just pulled on two there. And the other thing is, have a system for the way you interview. Make sure your questions are the same. If you ask one candidate one set of questions and another candidate a different set of questions, and you're trying to then score them, that's not a fair and equitable process. Ask every candidate the same questions, score them fairly, and hire the person who had the highest score. Not, oh, well, this one had a lower score, but I like them because that is then bias, right? And that's where we then hire people we like, not hire people or the best person who can do the job.
It sounds like there's a little bit of conflict between what you're saying there and what Alex is saying about don't interview the job skills, interview the person to see if they fit in. So how do you square those two sorts of that little diversity of opinion there? Alex, can you address it?
I don't think that we're at odds under any circumstances. I think what we're saying is that there's a different journey for each path, right? You have to think about what your beginning stage is going to be. You have to think about what your middle is, and you have to think about what your end is. And it really depends on the situation that you're trying to solve for within your organization. The skill sets are still the skill sets. And depending on where it sits in that matrix, right? This is a starting position, a little bit of a different interview than a mid, than a senior, right? And you're looking at those pieces. And of course, you're going to have certain important factors that you're looking for throughout that process. But you also have to keep in mind that as long as you've created that development ecosystem, you also have a way of training internally and externally to make sure that people have a trajectory for their career. So it's not at odds per se. And when you think about the panel being a diverse panel, that's extremely important. People want to see that they are represented. It doesn't, just because a manager is hiring for a particular position, doesn't mean that you don't want to give that insight to the individual about what the rest of your organization potentially looks like, right? They want to see each other in it. And that doesn't mean that and I'm just being careful here, that doesn't mean you target. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you put a panel together that represents who you are, who your organization is. And to Louisa's point, you interview in a consistent manner.
So, Louisa, you see the same thing? It's all part of the same process.
It is, yeah. It's all about being consistent and trying. You will never remove all bias, right? That's humanly impossible. Bias is innate. It's normal. It's, I'm British, I go for tea over coffee. Like, that's a massive stereotype. And I hope I haven't offended anyone, but I do. So it's normal, but what we're trying to suggest here is during a recruitment process, bias shouldn't guide decision making, right? So all of those things that Alex spoke to, totally, I would absolutely incorporate into an interview process. I would just make sure that every candidate gets the same service, right? They get the same questions, they meet similar kind of people, they're evaluated in the same way, and the candidate that can do the job or has the potential to do the job gets the job, not the person that you like most because of X, Y, and Z reason.
Excellent. Scott, would you like to jump in here?
Yeah, there's a couple of things on that actually, to kind of trying to put some of it together is actually looking at the attraction process. So often we speak to companies and they say, we've got a really good ED&I policy, and I look on their careers page and it doesn't show me that at all. So we're not just talking about job descriptions, we're talking about the lack of pictures, for example. It's just text, which then doesn't encourage certain people with other characteristics. There's people that are a similar age or a similar background. So it's kind of conflicting when someone says, yes, we've got a great policy, but I can't see it. And that's from the attraction stage. So you may not even see the candidates that you want to see just on that basis as a starting point. The other point I want to kind of pick on is the interviewing process, is in making sure that your line managers have had the appropriate training. So they actually understand what the goals are and what actually ED&I means and what does bias means, conscious, unconscious, because we still see a lot of hiring managers without the lack of training and they're still interviewing like they did 10 years ago, where they're just firing questions at the interviewee without actually listening back. And the other training is making sure that interviewer understands what your policies are and your culture is like, because they will be asked that, and you will lose people if you can't articulate and answer those questions in a concise and clear manner by demonstrating that on your website, with having different people on the panel, and all of what Louisa and Alex have both said.
Sounds to me like it's harder to be the employer than the employee in many respects. There's a lot of preparation here. I got to go do my homework. All right, Alex, as a female of Brazilian heritage, you are an example of diversity and inclusion as well as a promoter of the ideals. So how did you get where you are? You said you had some help from others, but were there any other specific things that you think you did right to get where you are that might be good for others who are listening?
You know, it's a situation where I fell in to purchasing initially. I actually, and I think a lot of people say this, believe it or not, I fell into it. I graduated from college, and then I made the mistake of, and I'm going to date myself here, made the mistake of putting my finger on a newspaper article, turning around to turn the fax machine on, and instead of sending my resume to a publishing company, I sent it to Allied Steel instead. And all of a sudden I get a phone call, and I have no idea why they're calling me. I have no idea. And at that time, I still remember, and this was when gender gap was even bigger. So let's keep that in mind. I wasn't getting responses back. I actually put Alex on my resume versus Alessandra, which is what you see up there, because then people don't know. At least they didn't know, right? So, and I started getting more phone calls from that as well. But I remember getting the phone call, getting on and talking to this individual, and him saying to me, well, I didn't expect you to be a female. And me taking the phone away from my ear and saying, hold on one second, I will verify that for you. And I said, hold it aside, looked down, looked up and said, yep, from head to toe, is that a problem? And he stopped and went, no, that's not what I'm saying. I met with him right after that. He said, take the corner office and try everything. And I did. And I liked purchasing. And it just springboarded from there. I started there. I went and I got my education, actual certification as a paralegal, started learning contracts. But let me tell you, at the end of the day, when I look at my journey, I've had so many supporters throughout this journey. And it's not just women, it's men as well. You just have to find your people. And I know I said this in the beginning, but it is true. Find people that are going to support you on your journey, that are going to mentor you, that you admire, that can help you understand what you need to do in order to be successful. That's hugely important. And I've had such great mentors, my husband obviously included, which I mentioned. He actually applied to jobs for me at one point. But it is about that. It's a community that you need to build for yourself. And it's also about being creative and thinking about what your pathway needs to be, and not being so narrow-minded in terms of the trajectory of it. Because sometimes it's a zigzag, sometimes it's an up and down. It's just about you finding the job that you love and making a career out of what it is that you're trying to accomplish as it aligns to your values. And that's something that's been very, very, very important to me as an individual, especially as a Brazilian, right? And I happen to be Guarani Bugri, so I am partially indigenous, Brazilian Indian as well. And we have our own struggles, right? But you can never, never, ever, ever let that stop you from trying, no matter what. Take the initiative. Use your network, grow your network, find the people that support you, and then take your actions accordingly to make sure that you can get there. But that's the way that you build that ability.
Sounds like you're a great example of, or you had that your first experience there was somebody who really recognized that he should be hiring potential, not just job skills at the moment. So excellent. You're a good example of what you teach.
I try to do that, but I try to do that for others as well. part of what our responsibility is as employers, as leaders, as women, as men, as everything in this world is to stop and think about how you empower others. If you tell your story, others will understand that they're not alone. And if you act upon what your actual values are, you don't just speak it, but you act it, then people will understand that as well. And that's really important not to be silent about it, because everybody has their challenges and it has not been perfect, but it's my journey. And if that can serve as some sort of inspiration or insight or help anyone else, I 100% am the person that is going to bring that to light. And I am going to talk to people about it consistently so that they know that they have the same exact opportunity if they truly want it and how to do it.
Excellent. All right. So we've assembled our team here. We've done all of the things that we've talked about in terms of recruiting and building and attracting the right talent. It's been hard, but we've got this kind of diverse team. How do you make that chemistry work when you have all these different ideas, different cultures, different ethnicities, at least two genders represented in your organization? So how do you keep that or maintain that or turn that into a high-performing organization? Alex, what have you done to do that?
So part of this is education, right? And I know Scott mentioned training is really important as well, but it is about educating each other on about the culture, the background, the experience, and so forth. I'll give you a perfect example. So we just had an event, I think it was October 20th, don't quote me, October 20th, I think is when it was, but we had a pink out. And the pink out for us was about cancer awareness, but not really. It was really about cancer in general and how it impacts everyone regardless of who they are, right? Because it comes in all colors. Part of what we did with the pink out was people came dressed in pink, but they got to express that in any particular way that they wanted. They came in wearing sports memorabilia in pink, wearing something cultural that was pink. I myself came dressed up as Halloween. You know, everybody got to express themselves and feel as if they belong and they're part of a unit, regardless of what that is. So that's part one, is creating that sense of belonging. And then part two is making sure that the cultures are understood as well. Not being so siloed in the approach of, we're going to have an event, it's about the US. It's more, we're going to have an event, let's look at it globally and see what kind of event we want to have. We had St. Lucia last year. That was for Sweden. You know, we did a different event for APAC. It wasn't about Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. It was about getting to know each of the individual cultures and then truly appreciating what that is. And that helps us to get to know each individual for who they are and bring that to the workplace, because you should be able to bring your whole self, not just the person that's working today.
Excellent. So, Louisa, Scott, have you got other suggestions? What kind of things do you recommend to your clients to really keep a diverse team engaged and productive?
Yeah, I would say before I even let a client go off and diversify their talent pool, I always do work with them around how those people are going to feel included when they join. And that really starts with the leaders, right? So if the leaders haven't had, we're calling it now conscious inclusion training, or, you know, it was called unconscious bias training. If they don't understand how to foster an environment where everyone has perspective, ideas, input into projects, how things are going to work, the best solution for a customer, the best way to procure a new product, the best way to put together an RFI list. If they don't have the skills to be able to include multiple different types of perspectives, don't diversify your workforce. You're not ready yet. And in fact, it will just make your EVP or employer value proposition or your brand in the market worse. So don't try and diversify until you've trained people internally to include all the different types of people that will be in the environment. Leaders have got to understand what inner circle and outer circle means, because if you bring in a diverse workforce and those people now sit in your outer circle, aren't included in important conversations on succession planning, they don't get to meet those top clients, they are simply going to feel left out, not included, and they'll leave. They'll talk with their feet, right? And often you don't find that out until they've left. They're difficult conversations. It's sometimes hard for people to even put a finger on, but it's that I just don't fit here, right? And fit is a very, very tricky conversation. So, more and more we're moving away from the whole conversation of fit, because should the employee fit the company, or should the company fit the employee? Like, there's sort of a debate around which way that goes, right? So I think it comes back to training, making sure you've got the right environment before you go and embrace diversity in the way that you should.
Excellent. Scott?
I like the whole word belong.
Mhm.
Making sure that your employees feel like they belong in that organization, and that means giving everyone a voice. Now, some people on a Teams call will be more vocal than others.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the person that's generally quite quiet and maybe shy, that means that they don't get a say in things. We'll make sure that in the right way, they have a chance to say what they feel, in a group conversation, certainly. And then I like reverse mentoring is a really good thing to do, where you've got senior leaders being reverse mentored by perhaps more junior people in the organization, or different types of people, to open up train of thought. And that will really start building your culture then, and that will make people feel like they belong, as long as they're listened to, as long as the reverse mentorship isn't forced and that hiring manager doesn't really want to do it, but they've been told they have to, because that will have the adverse effect. But actually, if they feel like they are empowered to do that, and there's a good reasons why, and it goes back to the training and coaching, like what Louisa and Alex have said, that's a great opportunity to build some culture, and actually the sense of belonging, that if I'm a senior leader and somebody's joined two weeks in, they're reverse mentoring me, I'm giving them my guidance and they're giving their guidance, and you put it into practice. I mean, there's nothing more powerful than that. And then you kind of capture it, and then there's testimonials, and it goes on your website, and then you start attracting those types of talent that you can't find right now.
Excellent. Alex, did you hear anything from Louisa and Scott? Were you taking notes, to pick up anything that they said that you've missed
If
or haven't
anything,
done?
if anything, I just feel like I'm in a circle that makes perfect sense to me right now. At the end of the day, I think what we're all saying is it's about investing in people and meeting people where they are. If you just do that, you'll automatically get a sense of belonging. I mean, we talked about ERGs. I think it was Louisa that mentioned this. It may have been Scott, but ERGs are really important as well, right? At DNB, we have 4 different ERGs. We have a veterans ERG. We have a Black Professional Network ERG. We have Tapestry, which is our LGBTQIA, and we have WISE, which is our women's ERG. If you create an environment where people feel comfortable enough to be who they are and to share, you've already won one of many battles to come. But that's
Excellent.
part of the belonging piece of the puzzle, right? It's making sure that they're seen and heard. And Scott, I agree with you. And giving people that avenue, right? If they don't want to speak, they can text. They don't want to be on camera, fine, not a problem. They don't have to be on camera. It's about being okay and accepting them for who they are. And if you can do that, and you can bring everybody else into that same exact thought process, and your hiring reflects what you're doing from a cultural perspective, from an experience development, training, and just investing in people, that's really the key component. What I will say though, Bob, and I think this is an important piece, right? You want the leaders in an organization to echo the same thing. But that doesn't stop everyone from doing what's right, regardless of what that is. You have a responsibility, whether you're a leader, whether you're an individual employee, it makes no difference.
Excellent. All right. You have your diverse team in place. It's not all kumbaya once you have thorny procurement or supply chain issues to address. Your team has a diversity of ideas and perhaps culturally different ways of expressing them or interacting with colleagues, or there could be intentional or unconscious stereotyping, cultural or ethnic slights or miscommunications. So what sort of conflicts do arise, and how do you resolve them across these potential cultural, gender, ethnic divisions? Alex, I think I'm sure you had something like this, have some experience. So what do you do in those delicate situations?
The word conflict, automatically people think of that as a negative thing. I actually don't. I don't think of it as a negative thing. I think it's an expression of a different opinion, of a different outlook, of somebody's preference. And that's okay. You don't have to agree with everyone. And that's how we built our organization. My organization, when I say our, because I believe that every single one of my employees is critical, right? They're all part of my unit. So we all work with that thought process. We want to hear what people have to say, whether it's an agreement or disagreement or in the middle. It doesn't matter. This is the way that we foster innovation. This is the way that we rethink where we are today. The words, this is how we've always done it, don't exist in my organization. If people didn't come forward and if we didn't have conflict, I would be concerned. Because the whole point of diversity is what I mentioned before. It's holistic look at diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging, right? It's everything that you bring to the table. There's no way that there won't be any conflict. The key is really to make sure that everybody understands that the opinions are heard, people are heard, we talk through them, and then we holistically look at what makes sense. There are certain things that won't, but that's okay. I want to hear it anyway. And that's what I say to everyone. Challenge me. Tell me what I'm doing right. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me what you don't agree with. Because that's why I'm hiring you. I'm not hiring you to follow so-and-so. I'm hiring you to tell me what we can do better. So I don't think we have that fear in my organization, to be honest. And everybody's very open to listening to everybody's opinions. So I'm lucky in that regard. And just to be clear, I inherited some of my organization. I didn't just build it, right? So I had people that were in vendor management before they came over to me. I had people that were part of an organization that had category management that were actually not reporting to me at one point as well, right? It's a mishmash of who I brought on, as well as the folks that were already here. So there's always a very healthy conflict and conversation that's going on within my organization.
Excellent. Lisa, what's your advice? What are the steps to mitigate issues when there are cultural, gender, ethnicity differences of opinion or different ways of expressing ourselves in a work situation? What do you do? How do you resolve those in an equitable fashion?
Yeah, well, you've got to have great processes in place. You've got to have the right systems to deal with conflicts. So policy work through your HR team, the way that your leaders have been trained to deal with those difficult conversations, to Alex's point, right? Sounds like you have a very healthy environment of positive conflict and a place where people can express their different thoughts and they're respected. Where it's goes, sort of steps over the line is when it is not respected. And that's then just a general respect in the workplace issue, right? And also, so that's sort of on like work matters and thoughts and ideas. You mentioned in the beginning of the conversation about people having conflict over cultural or, differences. I've stopped saying bring your whole self to work. I say bring yourself to work. But when we're in work, we have a way of treating each other that is a respectful, inclusive environment. If outside of work you have certain beliefs or different differences, we've got lots of stuff going on in politics, right? In the next year in the US, next 2 years in Canada, next year as well in the UK. Those sort of conversations should remain outside of the work environment because they are only going to cause unnecessary conflict in the work environment that will upset the flow of work, right? So I think there's two different types of conflict. There's very healthy work-related conflict that leaders should be trained in leading and encouraging almost to ensure that we get the best result for our customers. And then there's other types of conflict which might be personal or identity politics, as it's now being referred to, which should remain at the door and should be conversations for outside of the work environment.
Excellent. Have any other suggestions to add to the discussion there, Scott?
No, I think they both covered it off pretty well. You're right. And I think, look, if you look at the most successful teams in the world, be it a sports team, a work team, they all conflict because they're all trying to drive towards the same goal. And healthy competition, and as long as Louisa said, as long as it's focused in the right areas on a work environment and trying to make your team or the sourcing process better or working with suppliers better, whatever it is, risk management in the procurement context, that's absolutely fine. And actually, you're right. You want people to do that because that's the only way an organization grows. Like a sports team, that's the only way they get better is by having positive conflict or positive communications. I think, and Louisa's right, you have to be careful from the beginning point and the outset of when you hire people is they are very clear on the boundaries of where things stop and where things start.
Yeah.
And if everyone knows that and everyone's treated like that, then you shouldn't have any issues moving forward. Of course, there's going to be some people that like to push the boundaries a bit too much, but that's absolutely fine. As long as they understand in the end, they've overstepped the mark slightly, and then you can kind of put them back in check, and then everything goes back to hopefully a smooth running team.
Excellent. So, Alex, would you agree with that sort of separation of that there's areas of conflict that we encourage and we like this diversity of opinions, but there's sort of now there's this personal or this outside of work area of your life that maybe should stay out of the office.
You know, it's hard because, especially as a female, I have other responsibilities as well, right? But I am a professional and I do show up to work the way that I'm supposed to show up, for sure. That doesn't change the fact that I'm not a computer, I'm not AI, I'm a human, right? So I think the human element does matter. So understanding where somebody sits in a given day, in a situation, right? Why they're having the conflict that they're having, and giving them the coping mechanisms that are necessary, whether that's through HR, through another resource, through your conversation with them, taking a break, whatever it is, you have to support people as well. Right. So I think that that's important. Do I think that we're going to be able to do that separation of this is your outside world and this is your inside world? No, we can say that, but that's just like saying we multitask. It doesn't exist. You can say that as much as you want.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist. Right. So I think it's really just finding that balance and being able to support people based on where they are at that moment, because it's not always a very simple conversation, to Louisa's point, right? So you have to be able to pull upon the different resources that are available to you, and not just, I don't like saying policy at this point. I would say it's the resources, it's the support, it's being able to have that difficult conversation, right? And if you can't do that, or if somebody's not comfortable having that conversation with you specifically as their manager or their leader, giving them the opportunity of having that conversation with someone else is also just as important, right? Because it doesn't matter how they have it, as long as they have it, because you want people to feel comfortable at work as well. And you spend a lot of time here, sometimes more than what you would spend at home, to be honest. So I don't think that there's an easy separation per se, because we all bring things to work. It's how we handle it.
Yeah, the boundaries sometimes they're hard to define. So here's a bonus question for you, Alex. How is the relationship between building a diverse team internally and building a diverse supplier base? We've talked all about our own employees, our own internal teams, but do you find that there is a relationship between having a diverse team internally and being able to build a diverse supply chain organization or a supply chain?
I do. If you think about it from you need people to do the work, right? It's a supply chain as well, just a different kind of supply chain. Just like you need resources, you need goods, you need services, you need everything to make your business work as well. The more diversity that you bring to the table, the easier it will be for you to meet whatever those requirements are, right? So making sure that you're taking active steps to involve communities right, that are available to you, to work with different organizations like a WeBank, right? And an MSDC, things of that nature, so that you're really looking at it from what opportunities do we have today? And then how do we fill that with the most qualified? And I do look at this from a different perspective as well, to think about this not just from a supplier diversity perspective, as you mentioned, but also it's the right thing to do, right? Much like you develop an employee, you should be able to engage with organizations and develop other organizations as well. The more
Excellent.
innovation that you bring to the table, the more creativity, the more diversity, the more you have a chance to not only retain your talent, but also meet the needs of the business, right? In a financial performance perspective, right? In talent retention. It's a holistic approach that needs to be taken. So it's not as simple as diversity isn't in the employee side of the house. It's on both sides of the house.
Excellent. All right. In the couple of minutes that we have remaining, Louisa, have we missed anything? What would you say is your key takeaway here from this session?
My key takeaway would be keep it simple. Actually, keep this simple. Like, it's not, I mean, we've spent an hour dissecting hiring people, diversity, including people. Keep it simple. Remember that people are all different. We're here to find the best talent, to train people, to retain people, and to develop people. Keep it simple. It's not as difficult as I think sometimes it's made out to be.
Excellent. Scott, have you got a final thought for us?
Yeah, I would say to some of the points earlier is hire for the skills that you need rather than what a typical job description would say. So think a bit more open-minded when you're trying to recruit or look for talent in the future.
Excellent. And Alex, I'm going to give you the last word. What is your key takeaway from our session today?
Diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging has to be intentional. It has to permeate through your entire organization, through the entire company, and through the actions that you take every single day. It's not a one and done situation. It's an actual journey, and you have to be ready for it.
Yep. Well, thank you very much, all of you. This is a very challenging subject, and it says a lot about all of you that you and your organizations participated today. There's a lot of very good food for thought here. So, and it's diverse food too. So it's from many different nationalities. So this is Global Sourcing Insights from SIPS. I'm Bob Rossback. On behalf of our panelists and me, have a great day.